Welcome to the next session of Cloud Exchange. My guest today is Carl Mathias, the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Marshals Service at the Justice Department. Carl, it's been a long time. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Jason.
As we continue our conversation about how cloud services are impacting national security and law enforcement agencies, the U.S. Marshals Service is a few years into their modernization effort. Now, Carl, last time we talked, I think it was 2019, you discussed your approach that was less about technology and more about adopting risk-based processes and agile development. And of course, underlying those changes is technology, and the Marshal Services, like many agencies I'm sure, will continue to live in this hybrid cloud environment for the foreseeable future. So Carl, let's just start right there. Let's get an update on the Marshal Services IT modernization strategy.
Well, let's see. So
it's that where to start question, right?
Yeah, I know. It's the modernization strategy is somewhat simple, actually, and heavily tied to the subject of what we're talking about today, cloud. The modernization strategy is basically get everything off on premise. And I've been saying that for a while. I said it in 2019. I said it before then. We're still saying it. But now we actually have roadmaps, we have plans, and we're moving forward. The big thing to know about that modernization strategy is we're trying to maximize the use of software as a service. And so if you look at what we've been doing over the last several years and what we'll continue to do, we're taking advantage of things that are already in the cloud. ServiceNow, for example, is now our ticketing system. Microsoft Office 365 handles our email, through Department of Justice instances set up. We're in the process right now of moving our VMware mobile device manager into software as a service instance that they're managing into the cloud. And we're also looking at our asset management system moving, which is a Sunflower product, moving that into a cloud-based approach. So as much as I can, I'm looking for SaaS services. But for everything else, we're taking different approaches. Some of it is straight up lift and shift, but we're trying to think of a multi-cloud approach to that. So because the multi-cloud approach could shift over time, what we've done is teamed up with VMware. I was basically their sponsor for an ATO for one of their products that allow us to shift our VMware environments into a VM, they call it the VMC, and then you can operate in the cloud, you can operate on-prem, and in theory you can move between cloud providers. So that's where we'll do some lift and shift. But then other things have been straight up, redo it from the ground up, the rationalization of products. So if you look at our modernization effort for our warrant tracking system, prisoner management system, that was a straight up rebuild, redesign, went through, I've talked about this in the past, and we've been working on it for 5 years, but straight to cloud. And then some of them we're looking at, and we've actually taken them apart, old apps, and reformed them in the cloud. A lot of our reporting systems, business intelligence systems, that kind of thing, that's all gone that direction. So we're moving along those lines. I think, and I don't want to take up every minute of the interview on just this question, I could, but there's been a lot of trials and tribulations and unexpected things along the way. We can talk about those as you proceed, but.
All right, let me do a couple backups here. So interesting that you're moving as much software as a service as you can, but as you also said, some of it requires new builds, and some of it requires kind of lifting and shifting, and some kind of hybrid form of probably lift and shift and rebuild, refactoring. Have you looked at the percentages about what can go to the cloud immediately, what needs to be rebuilt, what needs to be some sort of hybrid, again, refactor, rebuild, and lift and shift?
I couldn't give you exact percentages. What I can tell you right now is, and this is a fake number, okay, and I'll explain why.
Yeah, sure.
If you count our apps, it's 35% already there, okay, in the cloud. So then you've got this 65% sitting out there. But it's the reason I say it's a fake number, and I'll divide that 65% in a minute, is that if you're just counting noses, and say, I have 100 apps, 35 are in the cloud. Well, not all apps are created equal. Some are monsters and some are tiny little easy things to do. So that number's a little deceptive. It's probably, when you count that modernization, it probably would, in terms of effort, would slide more towards 60%, and we're working at 40 to 45%, depending on how you want to slide the bar. But if you were to look at what we've got to move, I would say it's probably going to be, I hate to say this, 80%, going to be a lot of lift and shift. 20% is refactoring, rationalizing, those kinds of things. But there's reasons for that. In a pure world, we would refactor everything, redo everything. That world doesn't exist. In this world, we have budgets, we have time constraints. One of our driving time constraints is that we have equipment in a FBI data center in Pocatello, Idaho, in our legacy data center. They're shutting that down next March. So I got to be out of there by January. Okay, there's no time to refactor everything I have sitting there that we would like in the cloud in that time. So we'll do some lift and shift. We're also doing some more creative approaches with how we can operate out of our other FBI data center and have a fast restoration method out of the cloud. So there's a combination of approaches we're taking. But by FY24, the end of that, I got to be in cloud.
Generally speaking, from that data center, the FBI data center, is it 100 applications? Is it 20 applications? Do you have a sense of how big of a lift and shift that's going to be? And are some things, when you say lift and shift, can't even go to the cloud? You have to push that to a different data center?
Yeah, once again, we're just kind of, if you count noses, it doesn't sound like a lot, right?
Right.
And so if you're looking at the mission apps, it's less than 10, okay? But not all of them are easy. What gets us is there's a lot of supporting systems in there that drive a lot of other business in the agency that you wouldn't call out necessarily as an app, or they exist to make those apps run. And so then you add another 10 in there. And now, you look at the calendar, how much time do we have left?
And it's also the combination of, there's the spider web. It's okay, well, this app is connected to this app. Oh, and this app that's there is now connected to this app over here, which isn't connected to that. And then you have to start kind of furling the spider web and see all the connections. And if we move this one to this new data center, what does that downstream effect be? Imagine that's the architecture, and we can bore people to death if we talk about architecture, but is that the key? Is that something you all have been working on over the last couple of years to understand here it is, you ready? As is environment.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, that has been the problem with moving forward on cloud migration, is understanding those relationships and the order things need to move in and what's got to happen as you move. So I think the last time we talked about my Chief Technology Officer, Christine Fennell, and she has spent a good portion of her waking hours in the last couple of years working on this with our IT services vendor. And getting that down and correct. Even yesterday, we're still going back through on the schedule, looking at individual tasks to say, okay, did we miss a dependency? We're even as we progress forward, we're still re-looking to see, did we miss anything? And we continue to find things.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that stands out to me as you talk about the move to SaaS, and I think we'll talk about Agile and DevSecOps and things of that nature later on in our discussion, but someone's got to manage all this. And you talked about a lot of vendor partners already. Do you have a lead systems integrator, or do you have, how are you managing it all? I mean, maybe not the who, but the how is really the bigger question. Carl Mathias is your lead LSI.
Yeah, in the end, to quote an old president, the buck stops here. Yeah. But if I can back the story up and twist your question slightly, forgive me, I'll admit I'm doing it. I think we had to bring pandemic into this. Okay,
that was my next question too.
Yeah, and I won't. I'll leave that question for you. Okay, but we created kind of a perfect storm of events that have happened. So we have. I had just awarded a contract to a new IT services vendor who we were taking a managed service approach with them. So now they're taking over everything, and they had just started to bring people in when the maximum telework mandate came down to say, okay, you can't come in the office now. And they're trying to come up to speed while we're spreading out. Now there's some good news to that side, but nonetheless, that was a problem. Then at the same time, we have the FBI saying, hey, we got to shut down this legacy data center. They have good reasons for that. And so we get these three things going together. And now all of a sudden, we're going, okay, we got a real problem here. So the answer to your question is the vendor, and it's BAE won the award for us for our IT services contract. they're responsible for making that happen as a managed service approach. Nonetheless, okay, we're the federal government, we're going to be involved, we're providing oversight. So Christine Fennell was initially in guiding the effort, giving that technical expertise, because she knows it from DOJ down to the nuts and bolts. She probably knows the electrical power sources inside each of those data centers. That's the kind of person she is. She's brilliant. And so she guided them through a lot of that, but they've taken it over. So now, are we involved? Do I have a project manager on that? Yes, I do have a designated project manager from the federal government, but no, BAE is running that for us and making that happen. And so we go through it. I see it every week. My other federal employees see it every other day as they work through the problems and try and make things happen.
I figured there was some sort of kind of support that way, because it's not a lot of the let's do the there's not a lot of agencies doing their own lead systems integrator anymore. Yeah. I think it's kind of flipped back and forth over the years, but with cloud, what I'm hearing more and more is we need a broker, we need someone to help, we need someone to manage our clouds. And so I think that's kind of what you're getting to, or is there even a cloud broker as a step?
Boy, Jason, can I just be honest?
Yeah.
We are not there yet. Yeah. Okay, I mean, do we need to get there? We do. Okay, but we're not to that point where we've got somebody saying, okay, you're the cloud broker. It's we have the modernization effort, which is going into an AWS cloud instance. We have a different cloud instance for some of these other mission apps that are going into. And then what's going on in terms of where does it go? Does it go to Azure? Does it go to AWS? Does it go somewhere else? Is often just a discussion between the principals involved, rather than there's a single belly button there we poke. But I think as a maturity level, that's where we need to get to. And I'm not afraid to admit that this is a journey. We're well into the journey, but we're not to that point.
The whole multi-cloud approach, it's much more complicated than people make it sound. Mm-hmm. Everyone talks about, we got to be multi-cloud, you got to have multi-cloud because you have, to use DoD terms, the fit for purpose and the general purpose clouds. And well, now you got to have someone manage all those clouds, because I think just in our conversation, I feel like you mentioned 3 or 4 or 5 already. Yes. So I'm sure that's a challenge coming up. Well, let's go down the path of the pandemic. One of the things, and we've talked a lot about it over the last 18 months or so, but did the pandemic force you to change your IT modernization strategy beyond the things we've probably talked about, but you can give us the U.S. Marshals services story, because I don't think we've heard it, about more VPNs, more infrastructure, work from home, laptops, like we get that. But in this Marshals even more is different, because you have so many people in the field already. So give me a sense of what the impact it was, and how did you all successfully deal with it?
Get through that? Yeah. So listen, if in the course of this interview, I'm going to admit weaknesses all along the way. Okay, I'm pretty honest about these things. Yeah. So the Marshals may have a new CIO at the end of this interview. But this was one area we thought ahead. Yeah. All right, so we had made a decision 5-6 years ago. It wasn't long after I got there that we needed to be more mobile, that our personnel, regardless of whether operational personnel or whether administrative personnel, needed to be able to do their job from anywhere, anytime. And so we had actually focused on that and built up those capabilities to be able to work remotely. We actually ran pandemic exercises, but the thing we looked at was we thought it would be a regional thing. It would be the national capital region. And what if we can't work from here? How do we keep everything going? How do people work from home? We'd never considered the entire nation doing it. So when it actually happened, we'd actually thought through the problem. We just had to expand the scope. And what we found out was to actually talk VPNs, we had to add a few more subnets, and off we went. And so in terms of the modernization, it didn't affect us at all. A lot of those people are already teleworking. A lot of my staff were at least part-time teleworking, so they were used to this idea. So we didn't skip a beat would be and I know that sounds trite, but really we didn't. And and give credit to Jared Bruner over on the big modernization effort that he's running. They actually increased their burn down rate on their story points for Agile. They got better as they worked away. And so it's odd to say it really didn't affect that modernization, that move to cloud, other than we lost that first part where you bring in a new vendor, and I have a strong belief that you need to have some personal interaction to build teams and to keep team cohesion, and we lost that. And I think if that was the big impact, but that wasn't about modernization. That was more about O&M and IT ops, and standing up the service desk. Because the service desk provider had to just kick their people to their homes, which meant you don't get that hot room cooperative, hey, Sue, will you come over and show me this? I don't know what this customer's telling me. You get that interaction in a call center. You don't get it if you're sitting at your home. And so they overcame that, to their credit. They're now to the point of, this is the best, I know it's strained, but this is the best call service we've had. I mean, the average wait on time on the phone is 17 seconds. We have this callback capability that now never gets used. So they're doing a phenomenal job, in spite of COVID.
I know from our past conversations, mobility was a huge push for you. You were even one of those people that worked from home once in a while, yes. Which is really important from a CIO, a leadership perspective, because, well, if my boss is in the office, I got to be in the office. But hey, if my boss is working from home, it's okay for me to work from home, even if it's one day a week or one day every other week or however often it is. I think it's a great success story. Carl, you mentioned Agile, you mentioned a couple other things. I want to go to down that path in a second. Before I go there, I want to just tag back to one other thing you've been talking about earlier on when you talked about your software as a service move. And you mentioned several mission applications such as judicial security, warrant tracking, prisoner operations, that you had to Humpty Dumpty it, right? Take it apart, put it back together in the cloud. What's the impact of the cloud and cloud services on the mission side? What benefits are you seeing, or do you expect to see? I'm looking for an update around the kind of the mission cloud coming together.
So I think I'll break that into a couple parts, because when you look at our modernization effort, it's more about infrastructure as a service. When we move the warrant tracking system, the prisoner operations, we built those apps using a product called Pega. There are many out there, but that's the one we picked. And so that one more infrastructure as a service. But to come back to your question about it, as we've implemented it in there, there are other packages that vendors supply for reporting that are available in a cloud environment that'd be difficult for us to set up, or we'd have to go buy more hardware for if we were on-prem. So when it comes to reporting and dashboards now, our abilities have just exploded in the way we can provide information and decision-making capabilities to the senior leaders. So for example, when it comes to prisoner operations, one of the problems we have is the U.S. Marshals does not actually own prisons. We rent cells. We have cells that we use to place people while they're on trial. And so we need to know where they're at and who's got capacity. That was a very difficult question to answer in our on-prem environments. Now, with the various reporting tools we have, not only can we answer that question, we can say this facility has this many open, this has this many open. You can see it on a map. You can drill down and look to see. You can integrate things like what's their COVID case rate, if you want to be careful about that. We actually did that. So those were things we'd have had a real problem implementing before, and now, once again, credit to Jerry Bruner and his team. They have done a fantastic job of bringing in those reporting capabilities and dashboards that just give us the ability to make these decisions. But on the software as a service side, we've seen some impact too, because one of the things that the Marshals is taking on, along with the rest of federal law enforcement and DOJ, is the use of body-worn cameras. And so you're collecting this footage, well, what do you do with it, right? So we had already been working that problem to work with our partners in law enforcement at the state and local level, because they need to wear cameras, they need to collect it for their local departments, but at the same time we needed access to it. So then you get companies, as an example, Axon has their axonevidence.com. You can put it in their cloud instance, they manage it, it's trusted by the judicial system, we can access it, we don't have to necessarily buy special software to do the redaction and things like that, the blurring of faces of people who shouldn't be handed to the press, yourself, and that's all software as a service. And so, I hate to think what it would take to implement that on-prem. right? And so there's an example of something, and as we move forward to now where our deputies are going to be doing it, the use of that is now going to explode some more. But it's a good thing the tools are there, and it's going to have a huge impact on us. Positive.
Positive impact, which is important. And I think it's the data piece, again, something else we'll talk to in our conversation, is huge too. The fact is now we understand much more about the operational system or the warrant tracking system that we ever could before. So that's a benefit that maybe you hoped for, but you weren't sure how it would work out, and then boom, you're in the cloud. The data is easier to manage, easier to dashboard, easier to understand. Do you have plans looking forward about other mission critical type systems to move to the cloud or to update using these similar tools, the way you've done the prisoner operations warrant tracking and judicial security?
So, yeah. Now I'm laughing because
those three were.
No, I'm laughing for a different reason. Let me tell you, the problem with seeing success is that everybody's going, gee, I never thought about what capabilities could be brought, and now all of a sudden everybody wants something in the mission area. And so the first thing I'm going to tell you, Jason, is because the hunger and desire for new applications grew so much, we actually, in the last 3 years, put together an IT investment management process so we could get our arms around these kinds of things. Because, whether, for example, we put in a discipline management process, for our internal affairs folks, and how do you speed up adjudication of a case against a deputy or something like that, or anybody, and how do you fairly handle it? That was an example of something that came through that process. Currently sitting on-prem but going to the cloud. We have other things that are going direct to cloud in there that deal with things like case management for background investigations that we're doing those kinds of things. But there's all kinds of these little mission systems. They aren't as big as the big monster modernization, but still significant. The body-worn cameras being an example. I've talked in the past about the little handheld shield product we have where you can do fingerprints and all that. That continues to be expanded and grow. And then there's just off-the-shelf stuff, LexisNexis, things like that. Those kinds of things that we continue to utilize. So there's a whole bunch of SaaS products. The only thing we have to monitor is that IT investment management. Way more desire than there is budget available.
Always the case, right? Mm-hmm. No matter how much money you get, yep. Never enough. We all have that challenge.
So basically that investment management process puts, it's not Carl Mathias making those decisions now. We have our senior leadership in the agency. They have a stake in this. We also bring in some people from the field. And we talk through these, and everybody's really good. They put on their big picture hat. They don't go parochial and try and get their pet project through, and it's worked really well for us.
Do you find that you're working through your list, or do you find that you have a list of, pick the number 150, whatever it is, that every time you take one off, 3 are added? Do you feel like you're making progress of getting some of these more mission-focused systems applications into the cloud?
We are. It's certainly not as fast as some people would like, but it's a Shark Tank approach. Every year you have to recompete your project, and some people begin, after they get feedback from senior leadership, realize that's not going anywhere. Okay, and sometimes it was, you ranked high, but the funding didn't reach down to you, so they'll resubmit. But they are required to come in and pitch their product, and when we could meet. We've done it virtually for the last couple of years, or the last year and a half, but before that, we literally set up a roundtable, and they had to come in and pitch the product and explain why it was important.
Got to make it fun, at least, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it was useful.
Exactly.
It really worked well. So.
And I think bringing in the mission folks, bringing in the people from the field is obviously key. We've heard that quite often from other agencies. The related question to that is the bigger Justice Department question, because, and we've talked about this before. The Marshal Service is not an island. You have similar needs as DEA or as FBI or other parts of justice. Are there things that you are begging, borrowing, stealing from an enterprise perspective that could also impact the mission from either cloud or just IT modernization more broadly?
Yes, and give credit to Melinda and Joe before her, Melinda Rogers and Joe Klimovich before her. for doing a good job of making services available to us. So what we already utilize a lot of services that they're managing. So if I mentioned Office 365, actually that's a DOJ level instance of it that Microsoft manages, but it's handled at the DOJ level. We're just a subscriber to it. We're in the tenant with a lot of other DOJ users. So yeah, they supply a service like that. But within cybersecurity, they can bring more things to bear, more resources to bear than I ever could for a cybersecurity point of view. So they have the Justice Security Operations Center. They've got the tools. So for example, they're running an instance of Splunk that we use to go ahead and set triggers that we monitor, but it's feeding everything forward to them. But we're all one ecosystem when it comes to Splunk. We've got this heavy forwarder set up that sends data up to them. And so we're all working cooperatively. And when you look toward the future where this is going, there are a lot of other things. Unified Financial Management System, I don't want to forget those. WebTA for our time cards, all those normal stuff. But if you look toward the future where Melinda is taking things, Zero Trust is big. Right. So they're looking at a couple products there that we are going to be early adopters of as part of our body-worn camera effort, and later some of the cloud environment, because we have a need to be able to bring in external entities to access our systems, but there's all kinds of issues. Yes, you need to talk to the sheriff in a certain county in a certain state, but they don't have a clearance. How do you handle that? Well, that's where Zero Trust comes in, and so they're setting that up. We're going to be an early adopter, and we're partnering with them on that. So DOJ is essential to our mission.
In fact, I talked to Melinda just maybe a month ago for my Ask CIO show, and Zero Trust was a main part of our conversation. Right. She mentioned the pilots, and in fact, she even said her office was being an initial kind of pilot program, and I congratulated her on I think she said, you mentioned Luke McCormack earlier, yeah. Drinking their own champagne, and I said, thank you for using that analogy versus the other ones we know about. Let me switch over to Agile DevOps. When back in 2019, last time we caught up together, you were just kind of heading down that path. What is the status of your move to Agile and DevSecOps, and how's it impacting that IT modernization effort?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Let me just, I said there's some areas we're weak in. Here we go. We haven't made as much progress as I'd like in DevSecOps. We are really good at doing Agile, and it has certainly improved our success rate on projects. The problem is, I'll come back to the perfect storm of events. You bring in the new IT services vendor who's supposed to be bringing in DevSecOps, but then COVID hits. We have an emergency. Hey, we got to get out of the Pocatello data center. And now all of a sudden we've had to push some of these things I would have liked to have brought in at the end of their base year. We're going to end up pushing out another year, unfortunately. And so DevSecOps is one of those. So while we're really good at Agile, I think we're still looking at another year before we can really tackle DevSecOps. I know there's a lot of people, if you read the Phoenix Project, I should do it while I'm on fire and burning. Nope, don't think I will. Think I'll manage my risk by not trying to do too many things at once. I'm already torturing them. So we're moving on that. I think one thing we should talk about with Agile, though, that I've discovered, you used to hear me say things, I may have even said it to you, of, hey, we're doing Agile for everything. Agile's the best, you can't beat it. That is not true. Okay, so, and I have learned that. Okay,
but let's be clear, and so I'm going to interrupt you. You're not saying we're sticking with Waterfall either.
No.
Okay, because people hear that it's black or white, right? It's either you're either Agile or you're Waterfall. Go ahead.
Those people are going to argue with me, and I don't doubt it. But here's what I'm telling my staff these days. I'm not advocating a return to Waterfall. Don't get me wrong, but here's the point I make to them. If you were building a suspension bridge across a deep canyon, would you use Agile techniques to do it? I mean, would you decide what's important a week at a time or 2 weeks in advance and reorder your backlog of, well, you know what? I think that this, we should build this part today or that part. No, you would not do that unless you wanted a really collapsing bridge. So we don't do that for things that are straight up engineering projects. And the conclusion I've come to is that Agile is wonderful for developing and maintaining software projects. It's wonderful for when I'm attacking certain types of O&M projects. For example, making sure your backlog on patches is kept up to date and prioritized correctly. But when we're talking about things like cloud migration, it gets a little less effective because of that spider web effect you just got to. There's dependencies in there that you need to take account of as you move through it. And as much as we don't like to admit it, sometimes upfront analyzing the dependencies and developing a WBS with milestones is the best approach to take. And so I've decided, I'm telling my staff, if it's a straight up engineering project, think civil engineering, we can go with some more traditional techniques. Otherwise, let's look at Agile as our primary.
As you're going through this, and I think we should maybe put a finer point on it, as you're going through this kind of not Agile approach, but not Waterfall approach, the difference is you have an end in mind. You're not every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks saying, let's relook at the end.
Right.
That's the biggest difference. You're not trying to boil the ocean in one swoop. You're not trying to eat the apple in one bite, but at the same time, you know where you want to go. We want to move application A from on-premise to this cloud. That's an engineering project. How do we get from A to B?
Right.
Okay.
And look, there's nothing saying you can't have a more traditional work breakdown structure that has Agile elements within it. So you can say, I'm going to accomplish this task within here, this larger task using Agile. You just have to keep in mind as you're going through that, you're going to hit a date where you're going to be holding other stuff up if you haven't hit the date, which is, blasphemy to the purists of Agile, but there you go.
You mentioned, though, the success you've had on several projects is getting capabilities out the door more quickly. There's definitely a lot of signs of that. What is your turnaround time on those projects that you're using Agile for those areas that you are maybe dipping the toe into DevSecOps? Are you pushing capabilities out 6 weeks, 6 months? What kind of time frame, generally speaking? Because I fully know every project is a little different.
Typical project we do would be 3 to 6 months to get the minimum viable product out. Sometimes you're usable within 3 months. Sometimes it's 6 months. Depends on what you're doing. But then it never ends.
Right.
You're constantly enhancing, so you keep the Agile technique as you go through it. So, for example, we'd had our discipline management system. I had a failure on that, and it had failed even before I got there. So 2 failures in a row. We get a really superb project manager in there who uses Agile with the right product set. 6 months, we're working. After years of failures. So the Shield product, the handheld way you can identify people, run plates, all that. 6 months from idea to 2 deputies walk in my office saying we have an idea to product in hand. And they were actually testing it all after 3 months and fielded starting at 6 month point.
That's such great news. I mean, I think a lot of times folks in your position don't celebrate those little wins that are really significant. I mean, the fact that you can give deputies that type of technology, that they can check a fingerprint immediately versus, I don't know, maybe the old way was go back to the car or use the computer, some sort of process that probably took a bit longer. I think those success stories are really important to tell.
And I think people underestimate those small wins can have such a profound effect on your agency now, because yes, you'd have to bring somebody back to the squad room to get fingerprinted, and then you have to run the prints and all that stuff. And now, no, it's there within seconds. You can run license plates, you can run driver's licenses. Some people were, we're joking about, this is the best thing that's happened to the Marshals since the automobile replaced the horse. So.
That's a great line, because I've been to your office. It's been years since I've been to your office, but I know you have the John Wayne, the U.S. Marshals poster in your office of the John Wayne movie, if I remember correctly.
We do.
Yeah.
I have a boot lamp.
Boot lamp. Let's go down a path and talk data, and then we can maybe talk about cybersecurity too as related. The reason why you're moving to the cloud, the reason why this Shield product works so well, the reason why people are happy is the data, because as you know, everything comes back to the data. Let's discuss, one, the approach to data protection, and then 2, I think the other piece of this is the connection to the cloud and how the cloud is making both the protection, hopefully, and the use of data, the secure but accessible piece come together. Let's maybe start with data protection. How are you guys looking at that from when it's in the cloud, when it's in transit, at rest, et cetera?
Well, first, we try to stay with government cloud environments to the maximum extent possible. There are times when I have to stray from that, but we keep that limited because of risk. Okay, so first, GovCloud have certain requirements around them in terms of who can work on them, what kind of protections are in place. But here's the bigger thing. A company like Amazon or Microsoft, or name some of the other cloud vendors, can hire security experts, and lots of them, for the whole, that give us a benefit I could never recreate on my own. So when some people look at it as going to the cloud is less secure. I look at it as you're actually more secure, but you cannot give up the fundamentals. And what are the fundamentals? Well, even in my on-prem environment, I encrypt everything. Okay, I encrypt it as it's being transmitted. I encrypted the data that's sitting at rest. All of those things, the normal things you would do, you still have to keep doing in the cloud. You don't get to relinquish that. You have to have a little more diligence with some cloud-like things like, S3 buckets being an example. How many times have we heard in the press about somebody leaving one open to the public? Once again, cloud helps you with that. But I think it's also, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. First of all, I joke with the cloud is just somebody else's data center, right? Okay, so, but the beautiful thing about that cloud environment is we can bring in new identity capabilities, just throwing names out, Okta, Zscaler, there's other products that you can bring in to help with identity that help strengthen things. And so the other thing that we like is when you need to patch, okay, I'm not going from place to place, it's all in one location. And if it's software as a service, guess what? It's the vendor's responsibility. We're monitoring them to make sure they actually do it. And Microsoft every so often is, not beating up on Microsoft too much, but every so often they get a pointed question from me and my CISO on, hey, what's going on here? They can hit everything at once in the cloud. That's something that was more difficult with multiple data centers.
And you mentioned zero trust. I know it's still maybe early on. As I mentioned, I talked to Melinda Rogers, the DOJ CIO, and she mentioned this is just kind of getting some traction, and the pandemic helped kind of push it forward. How are you looking at zero trust, and have you started some pieces and parts of it? Because we'll repeat this because we have to make sure it's not a product. It's an idea, it's a concept, it's a framework. I don't want anyone to think I turned my zero trust on today.
No. It's definitely multiple things. I think what I got to tie this back to a trickier problem. Let me use body-worn cameras as an example. Typical body-worn camera talks directly to the host cloud. Okay, they aren't made to go through the Justice Network and wind their way around and have intermediaries. They're made to go from a commercial network straight to the cloud in a secure way. Okay, that's complete anathema to typical federal government thinking, right? Yeah, you can't do that. You got to walk through a dozen different things and pose latency. Well, combination of TIC 3.0 combined with zero trust will allow us to do those things securely. And so, looking at body-worn cameras as an example and how we are going to communicate to the vendor's cloud, that's how we can make that happen. So that's our first look at it, and we will probably expand from there to go from there. But that's our first thing we're taking on.
Not just the body-worn cameras piece, but just the going from the commercial product or commercial service to the cloud, the government cloud. That, just to put a finer point on it.
You have to secure that method by which you're doing that connection, and that's zero trust does come into play there.
And you mentioned the identity piece, which is
pieces of zero trust come into play there. Yeah, I want to be careful. You're absolutely right. It is not today we spun up zero trust. Today we're spinning up an element of zero trust. It'll take us on a longer journey.
And the identity piece is probably one of those big pieces to it. Yeah. And it's funny because you and I have been around long enough now to remember when people talked about the roles and responsibilities and back-end attribute exchange and all that, and now we just call it zero trust, which is just funny how that works. And the last, we got about 5 or so minutes left. I want to go down a path of the cloud, but how's it opening the door for other technologies? we've talked about software as a service, we've talked about data a little bit in cyber. There's artificial intelligence, there's machine learning, you mentioned dashboards, so predictive analytics. Is that something that you were saying, okay, today, as we move to the cloud, that door continues to open wider for these new, I'm not sure they're emerging technologies anymore, but we'll put them in that bucket?
Yeah. Certainly, the obvious answer, of course, it does, right? The question is, what's of use to the marshals? And I think we'll come back to the idea that if I had to do things on premise, how do I bring in an AI system that maybe can help me make better decisions about where we put our deputies? There's a limited number of deputies, and there's a lot of locations. Where do you put them? There's 470 some odd locations in the U.S. Marshal Service. So we have a tough problem. AI, data analytics augmented with AI can proven in the past is not to assist with that kind of resource management problem. This is not new at all, but to bring in that AI onto an on-prem environment, I got to build up a lot of hardware, a lot of capabilities. I'm going to have to hire people, more people to manage that stuff. If I go to cloud, I'm going to make that some cloud vendor's problem, and I'm just going to rent bigger servers. If I'm really clever, I'll have platform as a service, maybe even software as a service to get those problems. And then I can ignore all that hardware stuff I'm going to have to deal with if I go on-prem. So I know that's typical cloud argument, but it's real now. I mean, there's real products out there that you can get in the cloud. You may not be able to implement on-prem. So we do think that in terms of data analytics, this is going to open some big doors for us. We're already seeing it, like I mentioned, in our dashboarding. But I think as we progress further and mature in our data management and use of our data, this is going to get even more important. So we're just we have started to put our foot in the door for data analytics. I'm advocating that we go quite a bit further. In fact, I was talking with the director in one of our reviews that I think if he asked the question, what are we looking like in 5 years? And
that's my question.
Yeah, so, right? So my answer was, let's look at those areas I just mentioned in modernization. Right. How do you predict the number of prisoners you're going to have? The better ways to do that. How would you predict the number of, judicial threats? That's another thing we track. We have people who are pretty good at this, but if, as I joke, if they win the lottery, we're in real trouble, right? So we need ways that are repeatable, that new people can come in and that system keeps working and explain why it's doing that. That's where those kinds of things come in. So it's a combination of AI and data analytics. Right now we're doing some RPA work, RPA on-prem right now, but I anticipate that won't stay on-prem long. Well, I definitely won't stay on-prem past FY24 because I'm not going to have an on-prem. So, those have saved us thousands of hours just in the pilots we've run. And so my CFO is just all over me to do more, but she also has to go through the IT investment management process, which is odd. So it means
that what's working if the CFO has to go through it.
The CFO has to go through it, yes. So, but I anticipate we'll see more of that, and I suspect that will be completely a cloud offering.
Is the RPA, you mentioned CFO, that's a key area that we see a lot of other agencies. Are you also applying RPA or thinking about applying RPA, robotics process automation, to mission areas or to other back-end areas beyond the financial management side?
There's a lot of potential there for that because when we're talking about how do we talk to other agencies, how do we talk to other data systems, there's still not a lot of great connections there. So there's some manual work that occurs that, I would rather the deputy were out taking care of prisoners or catching fugitives than moving from this spreadsheet to that spreadsheet, okay? And essentially that's what was going on at the Austin Processing Center for some of the financial transactions, but there's similar types of things that happen in our operational community we could probably take care of with RPA. We're just, right now, there's, once again, more hunger, more need than budget and time. So.
The story of the CIO's life, more hunger, more need than there's time. Carl, before I let you go, we're just about out of time. I just wanted to touch upon one last thing. And your director maybe stole my thunder here a little bit, but by 2024, we know you want to be as much off-premise as possible into the cloud, whether it's 100% or 98%, who knows, but you want to be as much as possible. What do you hope that the mission side looks like? What do you hope for the mission folks if we have this conversation again in 2, 3, 5 years from now?
Well, let me just end real quick with COVID didn't affect the deputies like you think. Okay,
Right.
They were already working outside the office. That's where they're supposed to be.
Correct.
For the most part. Okay, the prisoner folks a little different, but even they're moving things around. I think that the deputies will continue to do what they do. What we've got to do is get the right information to them at the right time. We've got to be able to provide them. It's all about officer safety. Give them that situational picture, be able to do it in real time. Don't make them carry 100 devices. Make them, make it your phone, and your phone gives you everything you want, or whatever the device turns out to be. So really, I want to enhance their sight picture for their officer safety so that they can do things not only for their own safety, but we care very much about the safety of the person we're trying to apprehend. We don't want them to get hurt either, and so that's why we plan these things. And so for them, that's the case. But when we look at prisoners, most of what we do with prisoners is make them appear in court, right? Used to be on the order of 1 million times a year, court productions. With COVID, that is slashed in half.
Yeah.
And why? Because the judges have adopted a virtual approach to doing a lot of the hearings. So I think what you're going to see in 5 years is a massive explosion of that virtual courtroom appearance. We're going to get better at that. We're going to work with the courts to make that happen. We're going to help the prisoner ops folks manage their trips better. We didn't get into talking about how when we fly prisoners, what happens on the tarmac. Right now it's a paper process, but we are in the process of making that automatic. Once again, possibly an RPA approach, but also using some facial recognition, not in the creepy sense, but in the sense of, is that the prisoner that got off the plane? Is that the prisoner we're trying to put in this facility?
All right. Well, there's plenty more to talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Carl Mathias is the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Marshals Service. I'm Jason Miller. Carl, thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you, Jason.
Now let's rejoin the studio for more from the Cloud Exchange on Federal News Network.